And welcome back to Face the Nation. We have an all-star lineup of political reporters today. The chief correspondent for the Washington Post, Dan Baltz. We welcome Jonathan Martin, who's the national political correspondent for the Times. And we have Amy Walter, national editor of the Cook Political Report. And it wouldn't be a political panel without our own John Dickerson. We have to pay him anyway. We're glad to have you, John. Glad to have you. John, welcome. Your first appearance here on Face the Nation. You know, you were the one that Bobby Jindal first said to the Republicans that kind of stopped being the stupid party.
Right.
And it was interesting to hear what he had to say today when I asked him, did he think they'd stopped?
Well, there are, current examples of the fact that you still have those comments. Mike Huckabee a couple weeks ago talking about women's libidos, for example. And when that kind of thing happens, Democrats are gleeful because it's exactly the kind of fodder that they want, and especially in a midterm year when turnout typically drops, to elevate their own base, African Americans, Hispanics, young voters, women. And so those are the kind of comments that you see party leaders like Jindal cringe when they hear, because they want this election to be entirely about Obamacare implementation, the state of the economy, President Obama's overall popularity, and any time that Democrats have an opportunity to change the topic, it scares Republicans.
And yet it makes it great for somebody like a governor, like Bobby Jindal, to have the focus on how dysfunctional Washington Republicans are. They get to make the case, well, this is why you need to to elect a governor in 2016. Forget about all those guys who are trying to run from Washington. We're the people that are solving the problems, and we aren't making those same mistakes.
And that's one of the reasons you see so little happening in Congress. There are two ways to fix being what Governor Jindal called the stupid party. One is to say smarter things. The other is to not get into the kinds of debates in which people say stupid things. And so when you see Republicans not deciding to take on immigration, in the same way, Democrats are not taking on trade. They're not taking on the increase in the cost of living on Social Security and other measures. Both sides have decided we're not going to take any risks because we don't want to say anything that's going to get us shooting at each other when we want to all be shooting at the other side. But that leads to what you say, which is, achievement in becoming the most do-nothingest Congress.
But, when they say we're not going to do any of these things, you have what happened in the Senate, where Ted Cruz goes in there and forces Republicans who were going to be able to vote against raising the debt ceiling. He made them vote, and they had to vote yes to break the filibuster. So there is a disconnect, I think, Dan.
Well, there's a disconnect and there's a division within the Republican Party, just as there are some divisions within the Democratic Party. But the Republicans are trying to sort out what kind of a party they want to be, not just philosophically, but stylistically. And I think that that's the big battle that we're seeing playing out. And as Amy said, governors have got one version of this, which is don't look at Washington, look at what we're doing in the states. I mean, what's going on in the states is really important right now, because you have at this point in history more states than we've had in many, many years under unified control of either Republicans or Democrats, and they're going in different directions. And so the country can look at Washington and say, we have no idea what they're doing because they're not doing anything. And you can look at the states and say, this is the Republican model and this is the Democratic model, and that's what's going to be on display in these state races this year.
And the polarization that we see in Washington, and often lament in Washington, is very much evident in the state capitals too. In fact, it's even on more vivid display in the state capitals, because as Dan said, you've got these liberal states and conservative states which are pursuing some pretty remarkably different policy agendas, and it leads to the fact that we increasingly have two different countries.
What about, we're going to have elections here, the off-year elections. How's that shaking down, Amy?
Well, this is not a great year to be a Democrat. It's usually not a great year to be the party in the White House in a second term, midterm, right? But when you look at the playing field, the seats that Democrats have to defend in the Senate are very tough. They're in very, very deep red states. The economy is doing better than it was 4 years ago, but it's not great. The president's numbers are obviously much lower than they were even going into the 2012 election. So it's setting up not particularly well for Democrats. What they're hoping—
And you haven't mentioned the health care.
Right, you're right, I haven't even mentioned that the issue environment. This is why you're seeing, to Jonathan's point about changing the subject, this is why you're seeing Democrats talking incessantly about things like the minimum wage. They want to make this debate about economic inequality. They want it to look a lot like 2012, where it was Democrats were the people looking out for you, we're on your side. Republicans are the ones that are on the side of big business and big insurance. If they can make that debate work,
the
they think.
issues.
So what happens on the health care thing? What are they going to do here? I mean, where is this thing?
well, I think
Solve it all, John.
Yes, right. I think Democrats hope that it will continue to sign people up. They'll be able to point to numbers of people signing up that's below the targets that the White House officially set, and then they've just got to hope against hope that there isn't one of these surprises. The big political risk on the Affordable Care Act is that there's some surprise, either a delay or a report from the Congressional Budget Office that reminds voters who already have health care but who've always been worried that this big thing out there is going to crash into their existing health care, that every time they're reminded of the surprises inherent in this enormous program, they get nervous. And so that's the thing that Democrats have to worry about, is that they're just surprises that then candidates will have to quickly come back. One shift we have noticed, though, is Republicans are less and less running on the idea of repeal. And so that'll be interesting to watch. They'll talk about replacement, but less ripping it out because of the hangover of...
And they have now presented an alternative.
Right. They have, which is another reminder in how we've shifted from repeal. In other words, now it's on kind of trying to replace it with something.
What's so striking to me, Bob, is that you've got the healthcare implementation taking place in some states quite successfully. I was talking yesterday to Governor Steve Beshear from Kentucky, which has really been a model of implementation of the Affordable Care Act. He said they have added coverage to 244,000 Kentuckians. At the same time that is happening in that state this year, in the Senate race, Mitch McConnell's entire campaign against his challenger is to hang the issue of Obamacare around her neck, Alice Lundgren Grimes. So there is this sort of odd duality of this implementation of a law that is adding coverage to thousands of people in this state, and the candidate for the Senate, the Democrat, can't even talk about it.
Well, there's another duality that we're seeing in these races, which is, as you all have mentioned, the Democrats want to talk about the degree to which the economy is improving, and yet they want to run against governors. They want to run against Republican governors for not doing enough on the economy.
Right.
So both sides are conflicted in the way they're delivering these messages on some of these big issues.
Well, if you wonder what the other shoe's going to drop on healthcare, it's that in October and September and October, people who have employee-sponsored healthcare, they get their rates for 2015. So right before the election, you're going to get something in the mail that tells you.
Let me ask you about that. Do you think that Republicans can take the Senate down? Or where do you think that is right now?
It is. I think that there is a distinct possibility that they can. I mean, I had thought earlier that they had a even more of an uphill slog to do it. I think the map now is such that they could certainly do it. I mean, there are plenty of races available that we see that are, well within play. So yes, it's very possible. If I were Democrats at this point, I would be quite nervous about it.
And my sense is the House will stay in Republican hands.
Yes, I think everybody agrees on that.
Let's talk a little presidential politics. We have two people at the table here, both of whom would like to run. I don't think there's any question about that. Can anybody get past Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination?
Well, I mean, we should never say never, because if we had been here, 8 years ago, we would have said, can anybody get past Hillary Clinton in 2008? And it turned out somebody was able to do that. On the other hand, I think everybody agrees at this point that if she runs, she's in an even stronger position to win the nomination than she was the last time. There is no Barack Obama-like person lurking on the horizon in the Democratic race. So you would have to say she is a formidable front runner for the nomination, but we've got a long way to go.
What do you think, John?
Oh, I think that if she does run, she will be historically formidable, but I don't think that's going to stop the fact that there will still be a primary in their party. Somebody else is going to run. Governor O'Malley, I think, for example, still probably wants to run, even if she's in the race. The question to me is, what is the nature of that primary? Is it a sort of polite debate where somebody like Governor O'Malley makes an investment in his future, or does it get to be a little bit more of a traditional, tough, sort of no-holds-barred debate? I think that's still an open question.
Let me ask you this. Well, on the other side of the street, and I base this on nothing but watching television, I'm seeing Mitt Romney show up on television more and more and more. Does anybody think he might be actually thinking about trying again?
Well, I mean, I think he's doing some rehabilitation. There's a little, so personally, but I think also it's funny, and when he was running for president, there were a bunch of establishment money types who ran over to Chris Christie and said, will you please run? Right. Well, now that Chris Christie is having his prolonged indigestion because of this Washington Bridge problem, George Washington Bridge problem, there's a little bit of the establishment looking around for a kind of similar candidate. I think that's what that may be a little bit about. It's not serious. I think another interesting thing on the Republican side is you have three Republican senators, freshman Republican senators thinking about maybe running. I just don't know how the Republican Party, after spending so many years attacking a former freshman senator, saying he didn't have enough experience, is then going to turn to a Republican freshman senator. I think that's a real thing to watch in the Republican
So what
race.
about something else to watch, and that is, of course, Chris Christie. Is he done? Will this hurt him? Can he get past this whole bridge business now?
Well, he may be able to get past this. He's certainly damaged at this point. He's been here this weekend for the National Governors Association meeting, and he's been not visible in public for the most part. And I think that tells you a little bit about his condition right now. He's got to get through this. There's going to be more that we're going to learn about it. I think it's too early to say whether he's completely gone, but he's hurt. But can he come back? He might be able to.
A sign of his image makeover. They used to put out videos of him tussling with voters. After his most recent town hall, his office put out a picture of him giving a little high five to a little girl.
Of course.
Yeah, next time it's going to be puppies.
Right. It's always, you know who you don't want to be at this point in an election is the front runner. And so Chris Christie has gotten that. Marco Rubio got a taste of that. We're now seeing Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, who was seen as coming up in the ranks. He's having his own issues back home about emails being released in investigation in his office. So the person you really want to be is the one who's kind of there in the background, not getting a whole lot of attention.
There really is no
Well,
front
but
runner.
except
There is
if
none.
you're,
That's right.
if in the case of Hillary Clinton, she's more
Well-
than a front runner. She's this giant looming figure
right.
now. It
Yes.
appears, and I mean every poll shows her at about 70%.
Very, very formidable. And a sitting vice president,
And
two-term
among
vice
Democrats.
president is far behind her. There really is no modern comparison. I mean, maybe Eisenhower is the closest, comparison, but on the Republican side, there really is no front runner. And every 4 years, there's at least somebody that you think is going to be the guy for the Republicans in advance, and it's just not clear at this point
Which
at
is
all.
why, right, which is, there is a real battle within the party about
Yeah,
who it
that's-
wants to be, and there shouldn't be a front runner.
That is a very good point, because Republicans traditionally it's been kind of wait your turn.
They have coronations.
You run
Yeah.
a couple of times or at least once. Nobody gets it first time out.
But as John-
recently,
Democrats are doing that now.
Which
Exactly.
is Democrats. Yeah, now you got that's the Democrats.
As John suggests, though, I mean, I think this does set up for a governor to emerge if these governors who are looking at it aren't too damaged, to emerge as a front runner at some point.
I mean, I think you could see maybe 6 governors on the Republican side run. I mean,
And we haven't
right.
mentioned Jeb Bush.
or Rick Perry from Texas,
or
who,
Rick Perry
speaking of
wants-
having run before,
My guess is he's trying to run.
Well,
Rick
he's
Perry.
certainly doing everything to allow himself to run. Whether he will actually do it, I don't think we know at this point. But he's spending this year putting himself in a position to make the decision to do so.
Do you think we'll see as many debates this presidential election as last time out?
Well, not if the Republican Party has anything to say about it. There's a consensus now. What could break, which is that there were too many last time. It created this circus atmosphere. The only thing that breaks that consensus is the candidates who are in the second tier, who want to get their moment in the sun, and also, by the way, networks that want to have good rock'em sock'em events on a stage.
Symbiosis there, John. Yeah,
And so, but that's also for Hillary Clinton the challenge. I mean, you mentioned Eisenhower. At least there was a Taft with Eisenhower who was fighting within the Republican Party. With Hillary Clinton on the stage, unless it's a nice we're all friends kind of thing, if it's not, a debate is a moment where she
Why
could.
is she going to give Brian Schweitzer an hour? Exactly.
Right, exactly. An hour
Right.
just to wallop on her and make her defend everything about the Obama administration that a lot of liberals are disappointed with.
But part of the problem with the debates last time was that there were a lot of, let's put it nicely, JV players on the field. There weren't a lot of varsity athletes. You put a varsity athlete on a debate stage, that's actually good for Republicans. Those debates were terrible because it brought out the very worst of what the Republicans were, trying to be or trying to promote.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun this morning. Glad to have all of you. We'll be back with some analysis on the international news next. And we're back now with Time International editor Bobby Ghosh and CBS News State Department correspondent Margaret Brennan, both of whom have had a very busy weekend. Bobby, let me just start with you. We talk about we don't have much good news around here, but there was some pretty good news. This El Chapo Guzman
Yes,
AKA Shorty.
Yeah, it's a big deal in Mexico. One of the baddest of the bad cartel leaders. He was the leader of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the last men standing. The government has systematically gotten to a lot of the other cartels, and this was a very, very big deal. They got Shorty. And it's a program that Peña Nieto, the Mexican president, had launched when he became president more than a year ago, and there was a very, what we know of it so far, quite a lot of cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico. There had been some fears that that cooperation was fraying. Clearly, that's not the case. This guy escaped once before, 13 years ago, from prison. So, it's not all over and done with yet.
And this is just like something out of a movie or something. And they catch him in bed. There's a woman here on one side, and there's an AK-47 on the other side. I hope he, in the middle of the night, I guess he has to be careful to make sure which one he reaches for there.
Fortunately, he didn't choose to shoot his way out. This was not Scarface, which meant that there was much less bloodshed than there should have been. They've gone after his lieutenants quite systematically over the last 3 or 4 months. One by one, they picked them off. They acted very quickly to get information from them about where he might be. They went to the one house where he actually was. He escaped from there, but they knew where he was going, and they managed to nab him there. So this is a very intelligent operation, intelligence-heavy operation, and something to be celebrated today.
And interesting that this year-long operation came to a head the same week that President Obama was in Mexico. Yeah. And within the same week, they had a failed raid, and then this successful operation over the weekend. But this was the DEA in working hand in hand here with the Mexican Marines. And law enforcement officials say that you can expect a conversation in the next few days about an extradition here to the U.S. because of exactly what you raised. He's escaped from prison before, some would say, with some help from the inside. So
I guess if this were a Tom Clancy movie, the president would have gone down there and led the raid. But that's the way it is in fiction. Let's talk about the serious, the more serious stuff, and that is what's going on in the Ukraine. It looks, the president's left. They don't know quite where he is, but nobody knows. Was this a coup? He says it was. Is he going to leave? Where are we on that, Margaret?
Well, revolutions are easy to start and hard to finish. It's right now a question of who exactly is in a leadership position. In name, the parliament's running the country, but no one in particular is at the head of that right now. So the U.S. and the EU are working hard behind the scenes to try to get the opposition to form some kind of unity government because they're very concerned about these splits. You could draw a line right through the middle of Ukraine and see those who are still pro-Moscow and those who are wanting to be closer to Europe. And there is concern that there could be a real fracture here. But most immediately, this country's about to implode financially. They need cash, they need it quick, and the US and EU really want them to take that money from the IMF. It's going to be harder to take that medicine because they're going to have to make budget cuts and do some hard work instead of relying on Russian financial aid because they're incredibly dependent.
We saw this. One of the opposition leaders was let out of jail. She spoke to the protesters yesterday. She's in a wheelchair, but yet she's not the heroine of all the people that were out there in the street, Bobby.
Not at all, Yulia Tymoshenko, and she is a very divisive figure. She's been prime minister twice. Presided over very, very corrupt administrations, very inept. She's a good street fighter, and we've seen that character around the world. Extremely good street fighter, not good at governing. And Margaret was right. No one's sure who's in charge of the opposition. They're a very fractured group. The sense is that this is the end of round one. Now comes round two. Putin, after today, is not distracted by the Sochi Olympics. He's going to enter the ring. Who's going to be standing against him? The question comes down to who wants to own the Ukraine problem? We don't. Europe, maybe. They're not 100% sure. They're not sure they want the most bankrupt and most corrupt country in Europe as part of the European Union. The one person who wants to own the Ukraine problem is Putin. That gives him an advantage. So the question is who's going to go up against him.
Let me ask you both the question that I was once asked as a young reporter. I came back in with this story, and the editor said to me, "Tell me why I should care about this." Well, why is this important to the United States, Margaret?
Well, in name, the U.S. would say it's important for us to see that democracy is taking hold in the Ukraine. When it comes down to direct national security interests, hard to make that argument. But for Russia, this is their backyard. They have a naval base in Ukraine. They have tremendous trade. They have a shared border. It's in their direct interest. And when the TV cameras leave, they're going to have a lot of influence. For the U.S., we've been sort of hamstrung here. You had those unanswered calls for a week from Secretary Hagel to his counterpart in Ukraine. And that just shows this issue that the U.S. doesn't have a lot of leverage there. We do through the EU. They've got 28 countries who are threatening to really punish those leaders financially if they don't follow through with some of these reforms.
But even in Europe, not a lot of Europeans want Ukraine to be part of the European Union. They sympathize with the people in the street, but the European Union has plenty of problems of its own, economic problems. It does not want another basket case within the fold. It really, for Russia, you can't emphasize enough how big a deal is. Every Russian diplomat learns this on day one in diplomacy school. Russia without Ukraine is a country. Russia with Ukraine is an empire. This is sort of driven deep into every Russian politician, every Russian diplomat. So we can expect them to fight hard, and if we learn anything about Putin, fight dirty.
Let's shift to Syria. We haven't talked about that. Is there any good news from Syria lately, Margaret?
Well, it depends on your perspective. Yesterday, you did have at the UN this agreement, really one of the very first agreements that Russia signed on to force the Syrian regime to allow in humanitarian aid. Basically, let us give food to your starving people. That was viewed as a diplomatic breakthrough in many ways by Secretary Kerry. This is an agreement on paper. In 30 days, we're going to see whether or not that actually happened. But more broadly, it once again emphasizes, whether you're talking about Ukraine, you're talking about Syria, this face-to-face showdown with Russia right now. And in the context of Syria, oddly speaking, Russia seems to be the only point of leverage that the U.S. says it has there. They say their entire strategy for Syria is to pressure the Russians to deliver Assad. And either the U.S. has totally overcalculated their degree of influence or their willingness to deliver him, or completely underestimated Assad's ability to hold on. Maybe both. The Russians would say we've miscalculated majorly.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you. That really helps me to understand it, and I'm sure it's helped others. Very nice to have both of you this morning and get your take on these things. We'll be right back.